with China and Pakistan both hostile to us. We need to do more with Europe, which is part of the argument. We need to find ways of working with Russia and then work with the Gulf, because the Arab Gulf, both Persia and Arabia, have great influence in Afghanistan, in Central Asia and beyond, both on the religious, ethnic and linguistic terms. So I think we have to work with these three sets of actors to construct a role for ourselves.
So this week in Raja Mandala, in your column, you've spoken of India's sort of move towards Eurasia, taking off from the NSA's meeting in Delhi, where a whole host of countries have in fact decided to attend, excluding Pakistan, of course, and we're not quite sure about China yet. But Russia is there, a whole host of West Asian countries, and West Asian as well as East European countries, I think, all players in Afghanistan. So one of the main things you point out in the piece, which is interesting, is that while India had from the British, the Raj had a sort of orientation towards West Asia and took that role on, with Pakistan being in the middle, literally, geographically and territorially, poses a huge challenge. We see that in some senses in terms of what we can do with Afghanistan, or even with our direct ties with Central Asian republics, former Soviet republics. How do you see us overcoming that? That is a fundamental, no matter how advanced diplomacy gets, that basic challenge of geography.
I think that's one of the consequences of partition and the geography that came out of it. I mean, India was really cut off completely from the Northwest. Theoretically, we had the, what is today called the Pakistan occupied Kashmir, that had a small border with Afghanistan. Yeah. But essentially, the historical links between India and Afghanistan were now going to be mediated by Pakistan, which was in the way. Yeah. And Pakistan was never, enthusiastic about, always worried about India's role in Afghanistan, never wanting to work with India in Afghanistan. So that geographic limitation is there, which is going to limit what you can do directly in Afghanistan. So that's why we should not equate ourselves with Pakistan. I mean, a lot of people sometimes say, it's India-Pakistan rivalry in Afghanistan. Look, Pakistan has 2,500 kilometers of open border, and we have no border. So I think that's a difference we must keep in mind. But the way we can play a role is in partnership with other countries. You can't do it unilaterally, but you can do it in partnership with others. So that's what in the 90s, when the Taliban came to power, we worked with Iran, we worked with the Central Asians, we worked with Russia. So we could create a coalition that worked. But today, again, we need to build those coalitions to be effective in Afghanistan or in Central Asia, because without geography, we need to work with others. And I think that's where, with China and Pakistan both hostile to us, we need to do more with Europe, which is part of the argument. We need to find ways of working with Russia and then work with the Gulf, because the Arab Gulf, both Persia and Arabia, have great influence in Afghanistan, in Central Asia and beyond, both on the religious, ethnic and linguistic terms. So I think we have to work with these three sets of actors to construct a role for ourselves in Eurasia, if you will, going beyond Afghanistan and Central Asia.
You draw interesting comparisons with the Indo-Pacific, and of course, China in both regions, whether it's Eurasia or the Indo-Pacific, is after the US perhaps the dominant power now. So one of the contradictions you point out, the fact is that, say, ASEAN, much of the countries we're talking about now in Eurasia, even Europe, mainland Europe and Western Europe, there is a huge economic interdependence as well as dependence in some cases on China, given its size, and now that they're trying to convert that into a strategic advantage. How do you think India can balance that? We've been trying to do it with the Quad to a certain extent, which is, in this region, do you think, especially given the closeness between Russia and China and this sort of large land theater, how do you think, what are the kinds of powers we should be looking at apart from, and what is the engagement, especially with Russia going forward? Because we do have a historic advantage, or at least historic ties with Russia.
No, I think, as I said, look, one is Russia. I mean, I think Russians have become closer to the Chinese. That's a fact, and that's a part of the problem for India. But Russia is there, and Russia's influence on Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, which border the northern frontier of Afghanistan, is real. So therefore, they have a role. And the Russian military is actually deployed in Tajikistan. So Russia will have a big say in what goes on. So I think we need to work with Russia, because Russians, whether they will completely go with China, I mean, some skeptics will say, look, they're now totally subordinate to China, therefore they'll go with it. But Delhi would believe that, look, no, they got some agency of their own, they got some room to maneuver. So if nothing else, to keep their own autonomy and independence, they might be open for more partners, and therefore Russians are coming anyway to Delhi for the discussion on Afghanistan. But it is unlike in the 90s, where Russia and we worked very closely against the Taliban. Today, the situation is different, because Russians also want to engage them. And that's where we are. Iran is the other neighbor of both Afghanistan and Pakistan. They have ethnic linkages, they have cultural linkages, they have religious linkages. So they're naturally a big player in Afghanistan and in Central Asia. In fact, many people see Iran is the natural gateway into Central Asia. And it gives you access to Afghanistan, it gives you access to Central Asia. It has the oil resources, and on the Caspian Sea, it connects deep into Central Asia. So the problem, of course, is Iran is under international sanctions. There are problems with the Americans and the Europeans. But within that, there is a lot we can do with the Europeans. And that's why, if you noticed in the last few months, I mean, India has been spending a lot of time with the Iranians. That Indian officials go there constantly, and the Iranians have readily agreed to come to Delhi for the Afghan consultations. And then there is Europe. Europe is not part of this consultation. Yeah. But I think over the longer term, Europe has the money to shape the region. Historically, for example, even Central Asia, large parts of what we call Eurasia, are part of the European institutions, like the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. So they can bring in a lot of resources into, for example, they'll be the first ones, I suspect, to deliver humanitarian assistance in Afghanistan. For us, the historic problem has been that the conflict between Russia and Europe, Western Europe, has complicated things for us. And right now the situation is pretty bad. So India will hope that, look, Russia and Europe can work out some normalizing, framework in which they can work together. That's not in our hands, but within this constraint, we have to do more with Europe. And let me also mention Saudi Arabia and the UAE. While Persia, that is Iran, is direct access, UAE, Saudi Arabia, they have a lot of money, they have a lot of resources. And in the 90s, both of them were very influential on Afghanistan. But today that political influence has declined. But there's still Iran, Saudi Arabia, as the guardian of the Islamic holy shrines, and with their economic resources, and UAE with massive amounts of capital, they can continue to play a role. And I think that's where India's recent improved relations with the Saudis and the UAE give us an opportunity. And the new forum that we've created with Israel and United Arab Emirates and the US could also open some doors which are otherwise not open.
No, we just got a question recently. A regular reader of your column put it in the letters to the editors. I thought I'd bring it up. Everyone, by the way, you can read the column, of course, on the IndianExpress.com, and you should be able to have a link in the description wherever you're watching this video. So his larger point was, and I think it ties in well to this piece, that we have a sort of, we managed now recently between, say, the Saudis and Israel and Palestine, Iran and the Saudis. We're doing a pretty reasonable balancing act on what was considered issues on which, or conflicts or rivalries in which India would have to take a side, so to speak, or appear to be for years. The Soviets and Russia and Western Europe up to a point. And we're trying. Do you think at a certain point that China, we will have to, perhaps it is because of this long border dispute that's now been going on two fronts now, it seems, but do you think that the US-China balance on both sides is also something that India should sooner or later will have to consider and get involved in, or at least open up some kind of more productive relationship diplomatically with China?
And that was our policy till 2020.
Yeah.
That we thought, look, we can be, strategically autonomous, equal distance from both. We can engage both. We want good relationship with both. That was the policy since the 90s, that we must work closely with China. But it's China that has cut off the options. And the fact, look, in 2013, we had a conflict. Okay, that didn't fundamentally change your policy. 2014, we had a second conflict. 2017, we had the conflict in Bhutan border. And now 2020, where actually the crisis is much deeper. So it's not in our hands. It's not a question of we desiring to have good relationship with China. That was the story of the 1950s. That's also the story of today. We wanted a good relationship. But Chinese said, look, this is my territory. That comes first. I'm taking my territory, but I want good relations with you. So please don't take it amiss. I've just slapped you, but that you shouldn't mind. But we have nothing to do with, let's have a good relationship. Border is mine. That area is mine. So I'm just simply taking what is mine, but let's go on with trade. India is saying, no, sorry, we can't. You can't have it both ways. That we need a reasonable settlement on the boundary, which is where we are stuck. So I think for everyone, look, no, India's room for maneuver would improve if it has good relationship with China. But it is China which says, look, I am 5 times bigger than you on economy. My defense spending is 4 times bigger than yours. So I don't have to be nice to you. But all I'm saying is this territory belongs to me historically. And you might as well accept it. Or otherwise face punishment. So that's where we are. And I think the problem is there. And to balance China, you need the American support. So that issue is there. But within this, we're sitting with the Chinese in the Russian-sponsored BRICS forum. We sit with them in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. But my fear is till we solve the boundary dispute, that equal relationship with both is not on the cards.
So the final, just to follow up to the question before this one, sort of, is that, with Russia again, between the Moscow format, that invitation, which we took, and then there was all of that thing, and now, do you think it's all, and Russia agreeing to attend the conference and perhaps others following suit because of Russia, the national security advisor, do you think that this is sort of Russia also hinting, and there is a chance to not perhaps go back to the 90s or 80s, but a significant warming up post their China brotherhood or Chinese?
No, I think the Russians are also smart. Look, Russians have been around for centuries. They've been an old state. They've been a great power. So they're also hedging their bets because, even 2 months ago, people thought, look, it'll take a longer time for Taliban to win, or that once Taliban comes to power, they'll be reasonable. Those assumptions are today open to question. So the Russian main concern was, look, if you don't engage the Taliban, they'll undermine the regimes in Central Asia. But that they seem to be doing any case. So I think the rapid withdrawal of the Americans and the behavior of the Taliban is forcing everyone to take a fresh look. So at this point, it's only China and Pakistan which are saying, look, we want gung-ho, go inside, deep, help Taliban. That is the most important thing to do. So Russians are somewhere in between where they say, look, we must engage, but they're not saying what the Chinese and the Pakistanis are saying, let's recognize the Taliban and let's take it from there. So I think, but everybody will play for their own interests. And we have to be mindful of our interests and see where there is convergence and with whom there is a convergence. That is, so it's everyone is for himself. And within that, how you can work with the others.
Great, sir. Thanks so much. We will see you next week. Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Akash.